do a little engineering from time to time, but I've got a big problem. You see this PC case? Is this a computer fit for an engineer? No, of course not. So today I'm going to design and build a case mod worthy of not just any engineer, but this guy right here. And I've got another objective. Today's sponsor, FlexiSpot, sent over their E7 Pro desk that can transform from a sitting to a standing position and anywhere in between. So I think it deserves to support a PC that can match that level of transformatiousness. Listen, I'm an engineer, not a grammarian. Also, not an engineer. So how do we turn this boring gaming PC into an extraordinary dispenser case mod? We need a plan. The plan is simple. Spend 120 hours in CAD taking the game model from a fictional world where eating a sandwich can cure bullet wounds and turn it into a real functional machine. Simple, right? Now, the game model is symmetrical, but since half of my dispenser will always be facing a wall, I decided to keep it one-sided, so it's not a replica, but I did focus on keeping it as aesthetically accurate while also making it mechanically sane to manufacture. So here's the breakdown. The dispenser as I see it is basically 4 boxes stacked on top of each other with an air tank slapped on the side. So every part of my design should do something useful, so with each level we'll add a new feature. Let's get started. The base box in the game opens up to reveal a bevy of supplies and ammunition, but thankfully I'm not stuck in internal war over a patch of gravel, so I don't need bullets or medical supplies. So we'll skip those, but the pop-out door should reveal something. So I decided this would be a perfect spot for a hidden I/O panel. So I mounted this to the door on one side, and on the other side, I mounted the control panel for the E7 Pro desk. Normally, this would mount on the underside of a desk toward the front, but I thought it would look cleaner and be more fun to hide all of the electronics inside of the case, so it also screws onto the door. A simple front plate covers both panels to give it a cleaner look. Now, since I wanted to motorize the door, there's an attachment point right here for a connecting linkage that is attached to a servo horn. The horn is mounted to a servo, which rests in the front structural piece towards the side. There's a mirrored piece on the other side, and these front pieces form part of the base structure of the box. The door has 2 bores for 8mm bearings. 2 large bolts act as axles and slide through the bearings and thread directly into the plastic front pieces. There are 2 simple mirrored pieces toward the rear to fill in the rest of the details of the box. Now, it doesn't quite look like it'll hold up at this point, and that's because from the outset, I realized that this whole design wouldn't work as a 3D print, nor should it. So the design incorporates structural sheet metal plates, the first of which is the base plate. It's a 1/4 inch of solid steel and it mates nicely with the 3D printed blocks via 4 bolts. I also added 4 rubber feet to add extra grip, as well as sufficient spacing for the airflow for the 3 intake fans. There are just 3 big old holes at the bottom, but since the base is solid steel, that means I can also easily add a magnetic dust filter to keep everything tidy. Now we can add the massive side plates that make up the core structure of the whole case. Since the dispenser has this dark trim around the body and no visible screws, I decided that each of the modular boxes would bolt to it from the inside, with all of the weight bearing down on the plate, which rests on top of the base plate. I should also mention that these side plates are also made out of 1/4 inch mild steel, which is kind of crazy and entirely too heavy, but I want them to be made out of metal, and this was the cheapest option to have laser cut. But there's a lot more to the base, because this dispenser was designed to be mounted on FlexiSpot's new E7 Pro desk. The steel plates that make up the structure might be heavy, but that doesn't matter, because the FlexiSpot E7 Pro can handle a load of 440 pounds. So it won't break a metaphorical sweat when seamlessly transitioning from as low as 25 inches all the way up to 50.6 inches. While the E7 Pro makes for a fine standing desk, when I need to sit down, I'm going to sit down in style with FlexiSpot's C7 ergonomic chair. The C7 has a biomimetic back support and breathable mesh back, featuring a self-adaptive dynamic system lumbar support cushion that detects subtle changes in your posture and automatically adjusts itself as you move to ensure constant support. And nearly every feature is adjustable. The headrest, the adaptive back support, armrests, seat depth, height, seat tilts, and 128-degree recline. You'll enjoy all of those features because, let's be honest, you're going to sit down most of the time anyway and tell people you bought a standing desk to sound healthier and more in control of your life. But I'm not here to guilt you about your sedentary lifestyle, and it's the best time to buy the E7 desk. So use my code BFYTB to get an extra $30 off. Alright, let's keep stacking this thing. Up next, we've got the middle box, which contains a thrilling 6 individual 3D prints, 2 more rear supports, the main front face, the inner bezel, a hinge mount, and lastly, but not leastly, the push plate, which hinges on said hinge mount. You can actually push it. Wow! Okay, so it doesn't really do a whole lot, but I still think it's neat. What do you think the purpose of the push plate should be? Next up, we've got the top box, which is split into 2 rear supports, another main 3D printed face, an inner faceplate, a bushing mount, and a switch mount. This unit has 3 identical plungers that will act as switches. Each plunger consists of an outer ring, inner team-colored cap, shoulder bolt, spring, and retaining nut. The shoulder screws ride on bushings pressed into the bushing mount and press into switches mounted in the switch mount. The first switch will be the main PC power switch. The second switch will toggle the lower I/O panel door, and the third switch will act. There's a mounting spot for the Raspberry Pi Pico, which will read some of the switches and send the signal for the I/O panel servo. Before we reach the head box, let's discuss the accoutrement, including the ammo belt, holder, and air tank. The tank mounts to the side plate via this flange coupler. It's a press fit, but for extra peace of mind, it's secured via a small retaining plate with a few screws. Into that base flange, we've got a right angle coupler, followed by the tank base, which has a mounting bore for the side knob, which right now is just a dumb piece of plastic. It could easily be an encoder for, I don't know, volume control? You tell me. Moving on, we've got the main tank shell, which is held in place by this flexible collar. The collar mates with the mounting plate, which in turn is bolted to the core side plate. At the top of the tank, we've got the upper neck, which provides a secure base for the dial assembly. The dial is split into 4 key parts, a rear shell with a matching backplate, and a front shell with a protective window. Now, this is just a simple gauge in-game, but as luck would have it, turns out the dimensions of this gauge nearly perfectly match this 125mm round LCD that I bought a long time ago for my first Wheatley build. The air tank assembly has a continuous hollow path so I can route a USB and HDMI cable for power and video to the round display. Neat. On the other side of the dispenser, I kept this odd little ammo belt catch piece, which screws into the opposite side plate. While this design doesn't have an ammo belt, I kept this piece since it could still be useful as an integrated headphone stand. The head unit is where the magic happens. I based all the proportions of the dispenser design around this 15.6-inch 1080p display, which slots into this little groove in the top box. It's supported at the rear by this long 3D printed spacer block and held in place up top by 2 more brackets, which also support what I call the provisions display. I was originally going to make this provisions art a simple backlit sign, but I found this super cool 11.9-inch 1480 by 320 HDMI display that fits perfectly in the brow of the head box. Now, the head box is just split into 2 main pieces, so the seam is mostly hidden by the side plates. The dispenser also has this trim element that needs to wrap around the entire enclosure, so I designed these to be made out of bent aluminum plates that screw into the side plates. So it's pretty dispenser-y, but how does it become a PC? My computer has a full ATX motherboard, so I bought this pre-made ATX metal frame since it was considerably easier and cheaper than designing it myself. This is bolted onto a much larger metal plate that mounts to the upper box LCD retaining piece and also to the main base plate. FlexiSpot also offers this nifty PS015 power strip that's designed to mount to the back of the desk. But I have a lot of room for activities inside my case, so I designed an adapter mount so I could screw this power strip to the internal plate. This way, I would only have 1 cable running out the back of my case mod. And to seal everything up, I added heatset inserts into the 3D printed components so that I could screw in this rear cover, which also has a removable insert for 2 120mm exhaust fans. Now I can screw in the final rear trim plate and the main enclosure is ready to go. Since this is a pretty tall and top-heavy build, I also designed 2 L brackets with some spreader pads for the underside of the desk. With these bolted in, the case is now clamped to the desk for my own peace of mind. Alright, so what about the specs of the build? Now, this video was only sponsored by FlexiSpot, so I'm not going to throw a free bone to any PC part manufacturers who weren't part of this build. This was my custom build from late 2019, so it's still running late 2019 hardware. This isn't Linus Tech Tips. I don't have a warehouse full of 4090s that I can just slap in this bad boy. But regardless, I love it, and I hope you do too. Yo dog, I heard you like computers, so I put a little computer inside your computer so you could compute while you're computing. That's right, the pop-out head unit is actually a Raspberry Pi connected to a 3.5-inch 640 by 480 pixel display. I also decided that this inner piece would be a perfect spot for a camera. It's totally awkward to use, but totally awesome to play with and useful for me, since now I have a handy Pi powered and ready to go built into my computer. Now, I know there are a lot more things that this build could do, so if you have any ideas how to level up my design, let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you so much to my supporters on Patreon. And don't forget to use exclusive code BFYTB so you can get $30 off your E7 or C7 purchase. Thanks again to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video.